What's up, brand builder? Stephen Horahan here on the Brand Master podcast. And in this episode, I'm speaking with Rob Meyerson and Robin Goffman about designing brand identity with processes and structure. Now, Rob and Robin were heavily involved in the 6th edition of Alina Wheeler's classic book, Designing Brand Identity, which has become a staple for brand identity designers and their processes since 2002. And in our chat today, we dive into why structure and processes are so important in designing brand identities, how to learn from case studies of successful brands, and designing touch points on the brand experience across different media. So if you want to improve your processes for designing brand identities with lessons from one of the classic books of the industry with Rob Meyerson and Robin Goffman, then don't miss this episode of the Brand Master podcast. Welcome to the Brand Master podcast, a show specialized in helping branding professionals and entrepreneurs to build brands using strategy, psychology, and creative thinking. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Brand Master podcast. And I'm absolutely delighted to have on the show with me today Rob Meyerson, who has been on this show before, and in tandem with him, Robin Goffman as well. And we're going to be speaking about designing brand identity and the re-release, the updated version 6, I believe, of that book. It's an absolute classic, and we're going to get stuck into that. Firstly, welcome, guys. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks, Stephen. Good to be here.
Now,
thanks for having us.
Not a problem at all. Now, just to start off the bat, Rob, I was actually talking to you because you have been on the show before, and you said, "Hey, let's do another podcast." I've had a hand in the rewrite of this book, Designing Brand Identity, and I said to you, because I didn't know that would Alina like to join us. Unfortunately, Alina has passed quite recently, so I was obviously devastated to hear that. You guys working so closely with her, she's a legend in the industry with the influence she's had. Can you just tell me a little bit about Alina? Unfortunately, I didn't get to meet her, but I do believe that she was a joy to work with. Tell me a little bit about your experience working with her.
Yeah, I'll let Robin go first. Sorry, I was just going to say, I'll let Robin answer first. She's known her for longer than I have, but we'd both be happy to tell you a little bit about what she's like and what it was like working with her.
Yeah, go ahead. Rob.
Talking about Alina is one of my favorite topics. It's also one of the easiest topics because there's so much to say about her. And I think that we often jump straight to talking about the book and thinking about the book when we talk about Alina, but I also like to recognize and remember her incredibly successful career leading up to and also continued alongside the book. She was one of the few female founders for one of Philadelphia's top design firms back in the 80s and 90s called Wheeler. She was really active in many industry associations, including African Design Matters. She was a founding board member. Back in, I think it was December, they created a really, really beautiful tribute for her that I highly recommend everybody to check out. She taught and spoke at universities, agencies, small and large organizations. My personal favorite, she mentored students and professionals from literally all over the world. I feel like every week she'd call me and be like, someone just reached out to me from Africa. I just talked to this person from Australia. I just ran into somebody around the block from me. She had this way about her that she was just very connected. And I was lucky enough to be one of those many that she mentored. I actually first started working with her when I was a sophomore in college. I joked then that was my peak career moment, and I didn't even have a career. And it is crazy that now, a little over 10 years later, that statement I still feel very strongly about and holds true. She was just quite simply such a creative genius, and also truly, I think anybody that knew her would agree, one of the kindest, most generous humans around. So I definitely learned the most with her, and I also laughed definitely the most with her.
Yeah.
And
That
agreed,
sense of
Rob.
humor was that sense of humor was I mean, it comes through in the book a little bit if you read really carefully and kind of look at it carefully, but that was the part that I didn't necessarily know that I was going to get in partnering with Alina on this book. I mean, obviously I knew she was brilliant and creative, and this is such a groundbreaking book, when it came out 20 years ago. So that was all sort of expected. But the icing on the cake was, like Robin said, just how kind she is and down to earth, and really funny. We would take breaks for M&Ms while we were in the middle of working on this. Robin likes to talk about her Alina's fondness for ice cream, so there was a lot of food involved, it seems like, as well. And talking to her was just sort of bouncing around in a pinball machine with just ideas here and there, and let's jump on this and solve this, and then totally off topic conversation, and then back to the work. And despite that, we managed to obviously get quite a bit done, and she managed to get quite a bit done in her career. But yeah, just so much energy, so much fun to work with.
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't get to meet her, but that sense of humor is that's not the first time I've heard that. And obviously the legacy that she has left behind is all the people who she had an influence on. And I read that book a long, long time ago, and it was definitely before its time. But she's also left a legacy in a scholarship that she's put together. Isn't that right?
That's right. The AIGA, which she was president of the Philadelphia chapter for a time, and just was very involved with AIGA. And so they have a memorial scholarship in her name that people can Google and find. And we'd love for people to donate to it. It pays for students to go to design school. Yeah, you mentioned the impact that she's had on people, and we just had this celebration of life event for her in Philadelphia. It was this beautiful event with over 200 people there. I mean, I couldn't believe the turnout for this event, but story after story about how she changed people's lives. And like Robin said, sometimes it's people she never had the chance to meet in person. Sometimes it's a very close friends and family, and the way that she just really was generous with her time. It was kind of crazy because none of us, as far as I know, compared notes on what we were going to say when we got up to the podium to speak. And there was just so much consistency in those stories, and a big part of it was just how interested she was in other people, other people's lives and their journeys. And I feel like you don't see that all that much. When she came on my podcast years ago, I said that she almost seemed more interested in talking about me than herself. And I was the host trying to get her to talk about her book and her process and design. And afterwards she called me and just kept in touch, and that was kind of the beginning of a friendship that led to this book.
Well, that's it's so nice. And as I said, she's obviously had such an influence on so many people beyond just the book, from the stories that you guys have said. But the book is it's it's an iconic book now at this stage. And it would have been such a privilege for you guys to work on such a book, and keep that legacy going. And I'm sure it was a little bit daunting as well, working on a book that is, as you said, been around for 20 years and wanting to continue that on. And what I do remember from the book is how structured it was. Now, I'm Rob, me, when it comes to brand strategy, which I speak a lot about, I love structure. Everything makes sense with structure. What inspired the structure of design and brand identity?
Yeah, Alina often said she created the book because it didn't exist. Much of her career and past experiences not only informed and inspired the book, but also the structure of the book, which is a 3-part structure. 1, basics, 2, process, and 3, best practices. So the first section, basics, is really the fundamentals, which was really meant to ensure that a shared vocabulary exists across all stakeholders, from client to creative, senior leadership. The second section, process, deconstructs the branding process from start to finish, research, all the way through managing assets. And I think often the question gets asked, why does the process take so long? And so this section was really meant to provide clarity and transparency into all of the thoughtful considerations and steps and things that have to happen along that process. And the third section, best practices, which are case studies, which, shout out for the new edition. There are over 50 brand new case studies, which
awesome.
Rob and I are very excited about. And there is one from every single continent, which has never happened.
What's your favorite
before,
one, Robin?
So.
What's your favorite case study?
Oh, that's a really hard question. I have to say the Chobani case study.
I love that. I love that brand identity. It's I've actually got that as an example in Brand Master Secrets, which is our flagship program, because it's so unique, it's so colorful. I love that example.
Yeah, I really think it inspired a whole trend in typography and word marks that came after it. And so they were one of the first brands that I reached out to and said, we're creating this new edition. We'd love to get that in there.
Yeah, beautiful.
It's a great case study, and their team was awesome to work with. So that case study section are real examples that cover not just the creative and the solution, but everything from the goals of the project, process and strategy, that creative solution, and also results, which are often really hard to find out about and learn about and actually understand. So
yeah,
that's case studies.
I do find that case studies are such a great way to solidify the learning, because you learn the steps, you learn the theory, but then you see it all come together in the case studies. And the fact that there's 50 on there in the new edition, I think that's a really, really valuable addition to what's already a really, really good book. Now, one thing that I speak a lot about is the education gap that exists in the market when it comes to branding. Now, I've come from a design background, so I know that exists in the design world. When it comes to branding, when you're speaking with clients, I can tell you it exists big time in the strategy world as well. So I'm a big proponent for educating everybody you come across, because at the end of the day, if you educate your clients, you're creating better clients and they value the work that you do more. How do you suggest readers use this book to educate their clients or their staff?
Yeah, it's a great point, Stephen. And like Robin said, one of the big reasons Alina wrote the book was for exactly that reason, to educate her own clients about the terminology of brand and the process. But it's important to recognize that there are a few different audiences, at least for this book. It is used in schools, undergraduate and graduate courses. And so students are a big audience, but also it's just as relevant for practitioners that have been in the business for years, and people on the client side, like I said, who, Robin was sort of intentionally Alina was intentionally speaking to with this book. So I like to think of DBI as, Designing Brand Identity, as sort of the encyclopedia of brand. And as Alina said, it's like an encyclopedia. It's not meant to be read cover to cover like a lot of branding or business books. It's something that you can pull down off the shelf for, a quick, digestible review or learning about a specific topic. And then it'll give you ideas of where to go if you really need to dig deeper. Based on who we quote or what diagrams we show, you might then track those people down. So on the brand strategy page, we quote and show some work from David Ocker, and we quote Mark Ritson, and you can go track those people down to learn more about them. But the structure of the book also really lends itself to coursework as well. If you wanted to use it as a professor to go through from beginning to end, what is branding? How does it work? How is it done? You could design a course around, page after page, and then maybe have additional readings to, like I said, dig deeper on some of the topics that you need to dig deeper on.
Now, the book itself comes from obviously the visual side of things, but I noticed even way back then when I wrote it, because there was such a lack of information on strategy and the impact of strategy on design, because at the end of the day, as designers, you make decisions based on something, and a lot of the time, certainly before I read that book, a lot of my work was based on hunch or based on what's trending at the moment. Can you explain to me a little bit about the importance of, the strategic side of things and the strategic thinking that goes into the brand design process, or that flows through to the brand design process?
Yeah, it's a great point. The design work that you do has to be based on something, or it should be, beyond just kind of
should be.
Should be, yes. And so that's what strategy is, no matter how you do that. And I'm not too precious about there being sort of a universally correct way to do it. So it could be that you're sort of doing it without knowing that you're doing it. But strategy is informed by research or knowledge that has been gained somehow of the client and the business, of the market landscape and the competitors, and maybe most importantly of the customers or the potential audience for any design work that you're doing. Really understanding them, understanding what's going to resonate, understanding what's going to help the business achieve its business goals. That's how design becomes more than just superficial and just trendy, but actually becomes what design should be, which is a way to solve problems for a business, in addition to being aesthetically beautiful work. So that's sort of the role that strategy plays, is understanding all those different things and fusing them, distilling them into an idea or a handful of ideas that can be expressed or that can be brought to life through not only design, but a lot of different tactics and pieces of the business. It could be the way you design, quote unquote, the customer experience in a retail store. What do you want them to see first? How do you want them to interact with other people in the store or people who work at the store? It's all of that thinking that goes beyond graphic design or a logo or something like that, which is an important part. And I don't want to downplay the importance of it, but as hopefully all your listeners know, a brand is much, much more than just that logo.
Yeah. And look, I come from that design background, as I said, and when I kind of stepped into the world of strategy, you realize the not that the logo or the visuals are not important, but they become significantly more important when they're coupled with strategy. It's the yin and the yang, and it's the balance of the two. And I really believe that we communicate visually, and messaging specifically is what I see as kind of the crossroads of strategy and design, because we have visual messaging and we have verbal messaging as well. Rob, I've had you on the podcast before, so I know how passionate you are about words and about language and the importance of those. And that's something that, even after our chat together, I kind of, became a little bit more passionate about as well. What are some of the common pitfalls in messaging and voice for a brand?
Yeah, great question, Stephen. Thanks for asking it. There's a kind of wonky term in branding, which is verbal identity. I guess the counterpart of visual identity. And verbal identity, a lot of people think that's naming, but you're right. It's not just naming. The other components of it typically are messaging and voice, and I do separate those two things, although they're related. And one of the things we did in this edition of the book is take a 2-page spread that used to be called Staying on Message. And we retitled it Messaging and Voice for exactly that reason. It's much more the sort of industry terminology that I wanted to make sure readers had. And I also wanted to draw that distinction. So, I mean, pitfalls. Oh, and to clarify, messaging is what you say as a brand, and voice is how you say it.
Yeah.
So obviously those things need to be interrelated, but you can think about them separately, and it's sometimes useful to. And so pitfalls for messaging. I think the first is just saying the same thing that everybody else is saying. I see this in my own work for clients in industry after industry. You do these sort of verbal audits of how are brands talking about each other. You go to the websites of 6 brands in the space, and they all have exactly the same headline, or the about us sounds exactly the same. They hit the same 3 sort of notes about what they do or what they care about. A lack of focus is another thing we see, especially maybe in B2B, where brands just sort of say everything. There's just so much content or so much messaging that it's hard to get a grasp on, like, what is the thing that they stand for, that would have been hopefully defined in the strategy. I think with voice, the sort of how we sound, there's an issue with brands sounding too generic, just very, very bland, sort of not having a voice, just telling it like it is. We see that again a lot in B2B spaces. On the B2C side, Robin and I were just talking about this the other day. A lot of times you see brands just sort of trying too hard. It's almost like they want to have a voice that's too cool or too trendy, and then you end up again with all of these brands sounding the same, like they're targeting the same people with the same sort of pithy, witty little headlines that might be cool were they unique, but because they sound like everyone else, it sort of backfires. So yeah, those are some of the pitfalls that we see with both messaging and voice. But in the book, we have lots of examples of brands that are doing it well, and some tips on how to do it right.
Yeah, and as I said, case studies are such a great way to learn, and I've learned so much by looking at different brands, just being curious about different brands. And yeah, as you said, when it comes to messaging, there are so many mistakes out there. In fact, one that I see quite a bit is, the brand wanting to communicate to the world who we are, what we do. And there's such a focus on us. Look at us. Look at what we're about. When really they lose sight of who they're there for. The audience wants to hear about themselves. They want to hear about their problems and their challenges, and through those they can come to the understanding that the brand actually understands who they are and what they're going through. And then when they've gotten to that table, then they've got the ability to kind of spread their wings and kind of tell them a little bit more about who they are. But that's definitely one of the bigger mistakes that I see when it comes to messaging. Brand ideals is something that is quite significant in the book, and specifically flexibility and coherence around brand ideals. Can you elaborate a little bit for me on the significance of brand ideals and the flexibility and coherence of brand ideals?
Yes, definitely. So coherence and flexibility are 2 out of the 9 ideals in the book. They're actually right next to each other. So coherence comes first and flexibility is right after. So definitely a relationship. And it's interesting because I think they can often seem like opposites. Like, how do you be consistent while wanting to be flexible? But there's definitely a tension between them, and the best brands get the balance of that coherence and flexibility right. So coherence is really, fundamentally, it's the strong alignment and cohesion across everything a brand says, does, shows, feels, screams through to the roof, and how the familiarity is really created across the brand and within the brand too, versus flexibility, which is really about having access and the ability to flex a brand in really any capacity, whatever shape or form that may be. I think innovation really requires this flexibility, right? Like, we never know what new products or services a company may offer in 2, 5, 10, however many years. So having that flexibility, of course, while still being cohesive, does position a brand for change and growth in the future, and that way a brand that's been around for 100 years can stay recognizable while also not getting boring or stale.
Yeah, and that's when you talk about flexibility and coherence as a balance and the tension between the two, it's definitely the case, because if you're too consistent, then things can get boring quite quickly. But if you're not consistent enough, people don't know who you are. And I think color is a very good way to explore that. If your restraints around the types of graphics that you use, the shapes that you use, are really nailed on, then it gives you that it kind of gives you that credit in the bank to explore on a color side, and vice versa. So, it's definitely a balancing act. And as you said, the great brands are the ones that get it right, and there are a few great examples out there. The Premier League, that's the English Premier League. I really like their brand identity, and they get that right. They play a lot with color, but it's them. As soon as you see it, you know that it's them. So the tension in there is definitely something that needs to be balanced, as you said.
Yeah. So speaking of football, we have a case study in the book. It's actually the first case study because they're in alphabetical order. Is AC Milan, and
Okay.
it's a case study that I love because it is. You can consider it a rebrand, but the agency decided not to touch the logo because they wanted to retain that history, that legacy, and that consistency. And yet they found ways to take it into the more complete visual identity in terms of graphic motifs that sort of build out, and just sort of playing with it, and really made it feel fresh and modern without changing that single asset of the brand that they really decided strategically needed to be exactly the same. Sometimes that's not the case. We also have Campbell's in the book, which is another great example of a brand that is instantly recognizable on the shelf because of that red and white split on the can, and because Andy Warhol made it even more famous with his artwork. So of course they didn't change that, but they did find a way to update the word mark where you still recognize it as the Campbell's word mark, but it actually made it a lot more flexible. This is Turner Duckworth's work, more flexible for digital media and things like that by disconnecting the letters from each other. So there are some great examples of ways you can flex brands over time while maintaining that coherence. One thing you said, Stephen, which is absolutely right, is that if you don't have some flexibility over time, things can start to look tired. I would just add that for your listeners who maybe work on the brand side, on the client side, it tends to get more, I think, boring for the client or for the business a lot more quickly than it will for the customers. So that's something to bear in mind. Just because you're bored of seeing your logo every day when you go into work or when you're working on the brand doesn't mean customers have gotten tired of it. And then another thing is that flexibility is not just over time. It can be between different versions of a product. So for Campbell's, again, there's a kids line, a kids soup line that has sort of cartoonish or cool little illustrations on the cans. It's still very much the Campbell's brand, but they found a way to flex it so that it's more appealing to children. We also have Airbnb China in the book, and so seeing how brands flex across geographies is also a really, really interesting thing to learn about.
Yeah, that's super interesting, and it's something that that I have a real interest in, how different brands approach different markets in different ways. Nando's is a very good example of how they appeal to different market segments, different cultures, and things like that. But yeah, it's as I said time and again, those case studies are also awesome. The AC Milan is a great one. In contrast to the AC Milan, you have Juventus, who threw out the traditional logo, and they went all out with a modern design. So it's great to have a look at the contrast between those two case studies as well, and see how they approach them in different ways. Now, I want to touch on touch points because touch points is something that I'm, you know, I really kind of nerd out on, because when it comes to the brand experience, your touch points are the front lines of your brand experience, and your brand experience becomes your brand reputation and your brand image in the market. It's all aligned. It all translates. How do you approach creating touch points across different media?
Yeah, and that is the perfect segue from our conversation around coherence and flexibility, because this is exactly where brands can implement both of those concepts and ideals, and find that right balance for them of being coherent and building consistency while having that flexibility for the present and the future. So in the book, there's over 800 examples of touch points, ranging from tiny, going back
800.
to 800.
Wow.
I counted. And I think
Wow.
75% of them are new.
I'm gonna have to update my
edition.
I'm gonna have to update my my sound bites, because one sound bite that I like to use is that a modern brand has over 100 touch points. Now I can update to over 800 touch points.
Oh, no. It's not 800 different. It's not, we didn't mean 800 different types of touch points. It's 800 examples of touch points. So
right,
if you count all the different logos and all the different, everything that we have in there from an image standpoint, it's there's a lot.
Yeah.
Except on the ephemera spread, Rob, now I kind of want to go and count that long list.
Which
so
spread?
That's true.
There may be ephemera.
We have a page. It's called ephemera, Stephen, which is it's a funny word for basically anything that you could put your logo or visual identity on. So think about trade shows and things like that. So we have this list where it's T-shirts and beer koozies and keychains and things like that. But there's a full page list, which Alina had in the previous edition. We updated it for this edition, but it's kind of all the stuff that you might want to
anything you can mock up.
Yeah, basically, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's a long list. It is a long list.
But now I wonder how many are on that list.
I don't know. We didn't. Yeah, I haven't counted.
Yeah. But so of the 800 examples in the book, which really help just get your mind going as you flip through the book from start to finish, like you get real examples to see of things. Going back to my favorite case study, there's these gorgeous tiny little enamel pins from Chobani, versus a few spreads later there's this really cool augmented reality Modelo activation where you can basically look at a mural through your phone, and then the experience is seeing this 3D augmented reality interaction that brings Modelo to life in a different way. So both coherence and flexibility do really allow a brand to be that workhorse across any and all touch points.
Yeah, and I think if people, designers, strategists, they approached touch points as individual projects where they have to essentially brand each and every touch point. I'm not talking here about visual identity. I'm talking about sitting in the experience and go, how are we going to design something unique for each and every touch point? The brand experience looks after itself if you go to that extent. In terms of, Rob, I'm going to switch gears a little bit into naming, because I know that this is something, every time I speak to you, I like to squeeze a little a little gold nugget out of you in terms of naming strategies and approaches. How do you suggest brands approach the challenge of renaming? Because obviously, when it comes to renaming, there are different things that we have to consider. Is there heritage in the brand? Obviously, if there's heritage in the brand, that's a big decision. Is there even some kind of brand image in the market, some kind of reputation already? What impact is that going to have on the name? Can you talk to me about the approach of that challenge, specifically renaming a brand?
Yeah, thanks for bringing me back to my real comfort zone, Stephen, with the naming question. So, and it's funny because I did write a whole book about brand naming, and I've caught some flack for the fact that there isn't a chapter on renaming specifically. So, if I ever do a second edition of that book, it'll have to be added to it. But this,
100%.
yeah, but designing brand identity does have a section on renaming, and it includes 10 principles for renaming from Philip Durbrow and Ken Pasternak, formerly of Marshall Strategy here in San Francisco. Philip has passed away, sadly, and Ken is now at 2x4. But they have some brilliant thoughts. They're great strategists and namers. And some of their principles are, like you said, assess the impact that the change will have. Avoid doing something trendy. You don't want to change your name every 5 years just to try to catch on to some kind of trend. Of course, ensuring that you can own it, which is a big part of what I always talk about with naming, is the legal aspect of it. And then there's also the whole transition itself. So if you have already made the decision that you're changing the name and you know what the new name is, executing that transition in a really seamless way is difficult. Communicating why you're changing the name. Hopefully it's not, hopefully you have a reason that you can share. The big thing that I think about with renaming is try not to do it, right? The goal is to never have to change that company name, especially, and product name probably as well. I wrote a whole article in Entrepreneur called "Don't Change Your Brand Name Unless You Really Have to." So the bias should be, let's keep the name the same, even if it's not perfect, even if there's some small issues with it. There are times that you have to. It might be legal reasons. It might be you're expanding into a new market and people there can't pronounce the name, or it's offensive, in that local language. So there are some big problems that you can face, in which case you might need to change it, but otherwise try not to. And then the last thing I'll add is I just put together what I call the brand names report, which is some research that I put together, that I analyzed on brand name changes over the past 3 years. And a few learnings, I don't think too surprising. Shorter is usually better. So if you're changing your name, I would really try to be shortening the name, especially if it's a very long name. And then, yeah, as you said, it's not just about what that new name is. It's about what the old name was and the sentiment around it. So I suspect, I don't really have data to back this up, but I strongly suspect that a lot of how people react to the new name has more to do with, did they hate the old name? In which case they'll probably give the new name a thumbs up, almost, just based on, thank God you changed it. If there was love around that old name, or just familiarity, people had been dealing with it for generations, then you almost can't get it right with the new name, because everyone's just going to be at best sort of annoyed that, oh, now I have to remember that it's called something else. We saw that with ITA Airways, which is the new name for Alitalia. Out of 131 names I looked at, it was the least popular name. And I think a lot of that is just that people liked the old name. That brand had a lot of history and had a legacy. And it was sort of, I think, more, why did you change it, than it was anything specifically negative around the new name.
Yeah, and I think a big caveat to that, certainly for professionals who are dealing with brands and business leaders as well, the question and the conundrum of whether or not we rename or not really comes down to the fact that, is there any kind of success that has been had? Because, if you're rebranding a brand that has little to no exposure, few to little clients, then you're not protecting anything. It's really about the protection of any equity that has been built up, or the existing customer base that's out there, and the perception that they have on that. So thank you for that, Rob. As always, insightful when it comes to naming. You are my go-to expert when it comes to naming, and I like that I have you on my email just by hitting or and I think you're probably the first one that comes up. Guys, this has been an absolute pleasure. In terms of those who haven't read the book, who don't have it, I would say a lot of our kind of old school listeners will definitely have a dusty version of this book, or maybe not so dusty version of this book, going way back when. But to get the updated version, where can people go to get that?
So it's on Amazon. You can pre-order it right now. Depending on when this episode publishes, it may be available to just buy. The publication date for the US at least is March 6th. It is, unfortunately, it looks like it's going to take a little longer to hit the UK and Australia and other parts of the world. But you should be able to find it on Amazon or with other major retailers. You can ask design bookstores to special order it for you if you can't find it locally. That's the best place to find it. You can also go to dbibook.com. Right now, it's kind of a splash page for the book, but we're actively working on it. Robin's working hard to get a page up that has more detail. And then you can also just reach out to me or Robin if you have any questions. We're on social media. We're at that dbibook.com site. You can find contact information. We're happy to answer any questions about it.
Awesome. And as I said, if you want to get your hands on that book, I'll leave a link in the show notes. I'll also leave a link to your preferred social channels. If you want to connect with Robin, if you want to connect with Rob, I'll leave those links in the show notes as well. You can jump on them and follow them on their preferred channel. Guys, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time out to enjoy us. And I'll look forward to reading the new edition of that book as soon as it comes out.
Thanks, Stephen. It's great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Robin.
Thanks, Stephen.
I want to take a second to show some appreciation. I appreciate every single one of our listeners, but I have a soft spot for listeners who share the love. A shout out to Vampire Sisters from Canada. Information packed. These episodes are the perfect refresher and mind opener each morning as I walk to work and prepare to tackle client branding projects. Thanks so much for the comprehensive subject matter and truly complete lens on branding. Thank you so much for your review, Vampire Sisters. I really appreciate it. If you want to share the love and possibly get a shout out on the podcast, please take a couple of minutes to leave a review on your favorite platform. We really hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thanks so much for listening. If you want to learn more brand strategy techniques to level up your skills, make sure you check out brandmasteracademy.com. There's plenty of free resources and premium content for you to download and get you going. If you'd like to join our Facebook group full of like-minded brand strategists, all learning from each other, then find us by searching for the Brand Strategy Community, where you can find exclusive content for members as well. If you enjoyed this content, please be sure to give us an honest review on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listened, and make sure you tune in for the next episode of the Brandmaster Podcast.